One more day. Happy training camp eve to all who celebrate. That is Bill Landis. I am Austin Ward. This is the Podcast Daily. Unfortunately, we're running out of time to just put together some off-season speculation, but we got, I don't know, one more interesting one to go, Bill, which you were kicking around this idea. You do it every year, which is ranking the most stable position units on the Ohio State roster. And I went through it. And it's not easy. I don't know what's on your mind, but this is a tough one.
It is a tough one. This is probably the most difficult it has been for me. I started doing this, I want to say probably like in 2021 when I was still at The Athletic, as a way to kind of put a bow on the State of the Position series. It's like you kind of lay out all the information about the respective position groups and then try to slot them, in this case, 1 to 11, because we break down offensive line and defensive line in the two separate groups and secondary in the two separate groups, and just try to figure out like who's set up the best right now, who's set up the worst. And worst is obviously relative. Doesn't mean you're bad. It just means you're not as well off as maybe what might be the best position group in the country, which I think is largely how this roster is set up, which makes it really hard. I think I know what I would put last, and we can get to that. But like the middle was very difficult for me. And honestly, as we record this, I have not really settled on my rankings yet. So you're gonna help me figure this out as I finish off writing the story for OhioState.Rivals.com, because like I kind of got through the first two, and then I was like, all right, 3 through 10, throw a dart and see which position group you land on, because I kind of feel like they're all kind of bunched up there.
Yeah, and I think that the difficult part that I was getting into in ranking them is, all right, how much do you want to focus on the upside of this position? Because that would be different. How much quote unquote concern is there about the level of depth, which can change some of those spots that are in the middle of the rankings? I was like, I don't know if I want to differentiate between tackles and guards or or centers or defensive ends or defensive tackles or corners and safeties. Like, I think it'd be a lot easier if I didn't have to do that. And I could just say that the defensive line is really good and that the defensive backs are the best in America, and having to pick between whether the corners are better than the safeties. I was like, Bill's gonna do this, but I don't want to.
It does make your life easier if you don't break them up. But I intend to do that for the written exercise. So we can choose to do it or not do it on this show. I think what's clear, if we want to kind of get into it, is like the secondary is first, if we wanted to do it that way. And then if you wanted to slice it up or cut it in half and decide which of the two should be number one, I felt pretty confident making the corners number one, because I do take into account depth and also somewhat to the future. Like state of the position, I think delves a little bit more into the future, and this is probably mostly about this year. But I do, as a means of a tiebreaker, if nothing else, try to keep the future in mind. So, like I thought when you combine like starters, depth with a guy like Jermaine Matthews and a guy like Calvin Simpson-Hunt, both of whom I think are on the rise, then obviously with what Tim Walton is doing in recruiting, has done in recruiting, like the freshmen in this group are really good. I thought cornerbacks were a pretty clear number one for me, and then I had safeties two. But I think you can make an argument to put safeties one, because while we can kind of throw out there like, oh, maybe Denzel Burke will be the best corner in the country this year, I think we kind of know that Caleb Downs is the best safety in the country, and that carries a lot of cachet. So if you wanted to put safeties one and corners two, I don't know that I'd fight you too much on that, but I think those are definitely the top two position groups on this team.
Well, it also depends on whether you consider Jordan Hancock to be a corner or a safety.
That is true, and for this case, I consider him a corner. Although if you ask Jim Knowles, he might say he's a safety, so who knows? Yeah.
I consider him a corner. I think the corners, this is the best position group, period, in America. It's the best position, the most stable position at Ohio State. And again, everyone is nitpicking. I think there's a case to be made that safety could potentially drop below some of the spots on the defensive line if you put real stock in what happens to the depth of that group. We talked about Malik Hartford being a guy that I wanted to watch, or that maybe he was under the radar earlier in the week. They had to go into the transfer portal late into May to get Keenan Nelson Jr. to bolster that group. Pure upside, you're not going to get better anywhere in the country than Caleb Downs and Ransom. I think we can all agree to that. But I think there is a little bit of wiggle room when you start talking about, I think, the depth plus high end talent for the defensive ends and the defensive tackles both. But I do tend to come down on the fact that the pure potential with the top two guys being out there and what I think Malik Hartford can do, and maybe even borrowing Jordan Hancock if need be, does keep the safeties up there near the top as well.
Yeah, you raise a good point, right? I think if you were to take it like Lathan Ransom and Caleb Downs and JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer as a tandem, and then Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton as a tandem, which of those pairs do you like the most? I would probably say Caleb Downs and Lathan Ransom, but then once you bring up the depth question, you probably like defensive end a little more, right? With Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry. Even though I'm a big Malik Hartford guy, like I know you are too. I think a lot of people are and should be. But there's probably just more there with Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson, or more known quantities, I think. Defensive tackle, I think it's a similar situation to safety. Like you don't quite know. But I know you're a big Hero Canoe guy. So if you really wanted to put a lot of weight on the depth of the room, I think you could make an argument for either defensive line spot to be above safety. I just think like Caleb Downs is so good relative to everyone else at the position like in the country. And I think comparatively to how I would view like Jack or JT relative to defensive ends, or Tyleik and Ty relative to defensive tackles, like all very good players, all near the top of the list, but I don't think they're at the top of the list, and Caleb Downs is, so that carried a lot of weight for me, but I listened to it. I actually had, I would want your opinion on this, because I think you could just go top four, corner, safety, tackle, and in whichever, maybe like corner is definitely one, and then the other three you can kind of put them in whatever order you want to, but I had running back third. And then like I kind of split up the two defensive groups with a running back at number 3, because I also think there you're having a conversation about potentially the best players in the country at their position. Now there are some really good running backs, like Ollie Gordon at Oklahoma State's really good. I think like Amarion Hampton at North Carolina is going to be very good this year. We'll see what Donovan Edwards can do. Penn State's got a good tandem, but like Travion Henderson and Quinshot Judkins, man, like blind like test. I'll take those two. You don't have to tell me what else is out there. I'm good. I'll take those guys. And I like the freshmen. Like, and I know there's questions of depth there too, but 4 should be enough. Like, knock on wood, right? 4 should be enough. And the 4 they have, I think, are pretty darn good, especially the 2 at the top. So I had running back third, but you would maybe not do that. Would you have those 4 defensive positions in the top 4 slots?
I did have. I didn't want to break them up, but once I did, I had those 4 defensive spots, all 1 through 4. And I actually think so, because of the recent history and the difficulty of Ohio State has had specifically of keeping the running backs healthy, I actually had on my list, I had them below the wide receivers. And you could say, well, Austin, if there's injuries, the same thing could be true at wide receiver that you're going to say in running back. And that's true. Like, there is inexperience once you get past, well, there's inexperience even in the starting lineup. Jeremiah Smith has not played a single snap in an Ohio State uniform yet. Carnell Tate has not been fully healthy yet for Ohio State. Brandon Ennis has barely played. And so I don't mean that to be like hypocritical, but I think Emeka leading that group, and again, the bet that I have, and all of us I think have on Jeremiah Smith, and probably the likelihood. I'm arguing against myself. Emeka has not been able to stay healthy the last couple of years. Like, I want to make sure that I acknowledge all the flaws that I could have in this argument that I put together in my own rankings, and like not pretend like they don't exist. But the nature of that position, the amount of mileage even that you could say are on both Quinshon and Travion's tires, there's a part of me that thinks the composition of this room is a little bit dicier than just purely focusing on what the top 2 look like when they're healthy, which they are the best 1-2 combo in the country. You're not going to find anything better than that. Mm-hmm. It's not about just the loss of Dallin Hayden, the loss of Chip Trainum, the loss of Mayan Williams, but that has changed the composition of this room. All of them could have still been in Ohio State's running back room. Pretty unlikely that you could keep that. I understand and recognize that fully. Uh, but the top two, and then going straight to, um, two true freshmen, I that that made it tougher for me to want to put them in that top 4 or 5 groups.
Yeah, I think all that's fair. And by the way, like people are going to listen to this and then read what I write and think that I'm insane. Like I'm writing the story as we're doing this. We're doing this episode. I'm taking notes on what Austin says. I'm formulating my opinions as we go through here for the final written product. So you're getting to see how the sausage is made.
Does it help that I'm arguing with myself and you're not arguing with me?
No, because I did this. I'm doing the same thing as I'm putting it together. So I had, as I'm looking at my document now, like I have corner, safety, running back, defensive end, defensive tackle, receiver. And it's like I got the receiver. I was like, this feels wrong because last year I had receivers 1. And why would they have that much of a fall to number 6 when they return Emeka Ibuka, when they're going to have probably the best freshman in the country in Jeremiah Smith? Carnell Tate's a dog, and like I love Brandon Ennis. Like they should be higher. So I think that the thing that I probably landed on and maybe thought about a little too much is that a lot of that is projection still. Even with Emeka, it's like projecting Emeka in a world where he is the focal point, which I think he will be for a lot of teams, unless Jeremiah Smith rises to that level, which I suppose is possible. And then like Carnell Tate played a decent amount for a freshman, probably actually played a lot for a freshman, but you're still projecting there. Obviously, you're projecting with Jeremiah, you're projecting with Brandon Ennis. And really everybody else in that room, because even for the guys who are older, like they haven't played a ton. So there's just a lot of inexperience there. And I think I don't have any concerns about it. And if anyone does, I think those concerns will probably go away like after the first quarter of the first game. But they're there nonetheless. So I did struggle with that a little bit. And like I feel like I know what Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson are. And that's why I gave them the nod. But that could be wrong. Like especially like if we revisited this like the middle of the year, it's like who's number 1? It's like, or maybe it's corners when it's like the receivers are 2 because it's Ohio State receivers and they're always awesome. So this is where it got a little puzzling for me. But I don't disagree with anything you said about the running backs either. Like I think you could put receivers like much higher than I currently have them. And as I'm talking myself into it, maybe I will by the time I actually finish writing the story.
Well, and I know I've mentioned this a couple of times on a few different shows in the last couple of weeks getting ready for training camp. It doesn't rise to the level of full-blown panic. You can't live in fear of what injuries could do to Ohio State, because you could do that for every single position if you wanted to. I know you and Berm have both made this point. It's like, well, if any team in the country is getting down to their third stringer at name a position, they're not going to be as good.
Right.
And I don't have them below. What do we have? Like I have 5 other position groups down here. So I'm fully cognizant that Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson, and the fact that they can both play together and share the load, means that Ohio State is in a pretty decent spot. It is better than the alternative. I think you'd rather have 2 elite running backs than 5 average running backs. That's a trade that everyone would make. So
yeah,
when I have brought this up, and why I did again today, is that they lost a lot of veteran presence in that room, veteran maturity in that room, and guys who they could have plugged in without missing a beat. And even Dallin Hayden is in that category because he spent 2+ years being developed even without hardly playing. So it's only from that perspective that this is not the way that Ohio State would have, I think, wanted to build the running back room. And Carlos Lachlan, I think, is going to have to probably be careful with his management, because those freshmen need to get some experience, I think, pretty early on. And you, not just to protect Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson, because those guys are going to want to play and they know how to protect themselves on the field for sure at this point in their career. But if you're going to get into a 16-game season, then those 2 guys, Sam Williams-Dixon and James People, are going to have to play.
I think like the Carlos Lachlan piece of it might help your argument too. It's like I think we both like the hire, right? He's got a ton of juice. Like Ohio State, I think, ended up in a very good spot given the timing of that change. But he's an unknown commodity, at least to Ohio State fans as well. So there's enough moving parts there that I could see again, like not being concerned about the room, but just like relative to receiver and some other stuff, like do you want to move it up and down the board? I think I will say, tell me if you agree with this. So we've talked about safety, corner, defensive end, defensive tackle, wide receiver, and running back. So 6 position groups. I think those are the top 6. And then there's a line, and then you go to the rest of the roster. Do you agree with that?
I have that written down. Yep.
Okay. Okay. So what again, like there's a lot of wiggle room, I think, with the order, maybe aside from corner, but I think those are the top 6. The 6 that I feel most good about going into this year. I guess next, I had no idea where to go next. Like I currently have offensive tackle that doesn't feel right. Maybe it's, I don't know, is a quarterback. What would you have as the if there's like 2 tiers, what do you have at the top of tier 2?
I went back and forth with quarterbacks and linebackers, and ultimately I settled on quarterbacks because I think that Will Howard's volume of experience, Devin Brown's, again, thinking about March and April, the steps forward that he took, I think as a passer, and his undeniable knowledge of the system, having been at this point for, going into that 3rd year. Lincoln Kienholz getting a taste of experience, even if it wasn't ideal for him in the Cotton Bowl. And then if you want to talk about the upside of Julian Sayin and Aaron Nolan, I mean, I don't think there's a world where Ohio State is going to thrive if they get to their 4th-string quarterback, because no program would. That they're not even really factoring in terms of those top 3. And if Julian Sayin lights the world on fire in August, so be it. I don't think that would really surprise anyone who saw him throw the football in March and April. I think it's the physical part of trying to get up to speed as a true freshman that, like, I'm primarily only considering Will Howard, Devin Brown, and Lincoln Kienholz. And I think that's better than what most programs could be hoping to deal with in terms of stability, which is the debate that you were sort of hooking this around.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that the linebackers are unstable, but Sonny Styles is playing a new position, and CJ Hicks has not been a full-time linebacker. We've made this point a ton about how much value I think there is with Cody Simon. I think that's what bumps this room up, because I do think when you add in the Gabe Powers or Arvell Reese part of this conversation, there's enough depth there for James Laurinaitis that is probably more comfortable than what Ohio State has at tackle at this point. So that's a bit where I landed there.
I think you're probably right. I had it's weird. So like I had quarterback 6 last year, and I probably would have them like at best 7th this year, while also feeling way better about them than I did last year. And that's about the rest of the roster, right? That's about the rest of the roster being improved in some other areas too. But I love the experience of Will Howard. I think Devin Brown is a better player than he was last year. I think Lincoln Kienholz is a better player than he was last year. I am very much interested in seeing the physical developments that both Julian Sayin and Aaron Noland have been able to make since we last saw them in the spring game. I know, like, Julian tweeted out a picture of him, so all the guys have, from their media day photo shoots, and I thought to myself, like, oh, he looks like he has changed his body a little bit. And I think Air has too in some photos I've seen of him. So like that all seems like it's on track. I'm excited to see how that plays out. And I think like 1 to 5, like number 1 having 5, but then being able to go 1 to 5, like that does feel like a pretty stable room to me. So I think it would make sense to have them 7th. I would almost definitely put it above linebacker, only because there is so much unknown with linebacker, even if like the athleticism is off the charts, and it is. Moving guys positions, bumping guys up to roles they haven't really played yet before, like those are enough question marks for me to probably put that lower than quarterback now, with I guess the caveat that like maybe I'll again like receiver, like after one game, like, oh nope, that's the 4th best position group on the team, because those guys are a bunch of freaks. But I was going back and forth on whether or not, or like where to put the offensive line, because I don't know, like I'm a guy who loves offensive line play. I know I talk about it a lot. I don't know that I find myself like super concerned with where they are for this particular season. And they got to figure out right guard, but I really talked myself into Josh Simmons like being a dude like the last 3 weeks.
What a change from this time last year.
I know. So like I like where they're at tackle, and Josh Fryer's got to get better in some areas, but it's not like, I don't think he was like unplayable last year. He just got to get a little bit better, and I think that he will. I think he's had a good offseason. So I like where they're at tackle. I don't know anything about their tackle depth, but their starters are good. I like Donovan Jackson and Seth McLaughlin, and like you got to figure out right guard, but it's not the end of the world. We have to fill a starting position. So, it probably does make sense to go quarterback, linebacker, and then I would probably go the 2 offensive line spots and then tight end. And I'd probably go tackle, interior, tight end. How would you stack those 3 spots?
Flip a coin, honestly.
Okay.
I mean, I do have tackle because I think that the combination of Fryer and Simmons is better than, with all due respect to Donovan Jackson and a question mark, whoever that is. Like that is the difference maker, because that's one of the only spots on Ohio State's depth chart where we don't know who's going to be the starter. I do feel that Ohio State is going to be okay, better than okay on the offensive line once they figure out the direction they go, which I'm more convinced in the last 7 days that it's going to be Carson Hinsman emerging than I certainly was for the entirety of the rest of the offseason. But I don't know, man.
See. I thought Tegra looked pretty good in those photos he put out. Looks like
I don't think there's ever been
a little bit.
There's never been a photo taken of Tegra Shabola where you don't like, whoa, that guy should be out there. Like,
I want that guy running over people on my offensive line.
Again, that's me almost certainly being a prisoner of the moment in the conversation for what Ryan Day said, because the rest of the offseason we spent talking about Tegra being the first guy off the bus and the first one in the lineup at right guard. So that would be, I will not be surprised, honestly, if any of those 3, including Luke Montgomery, win the job. All of them bring a lot to the table. Tegra, pure physicality. Carson Hinsman, a year of starting experience, and Luke Montgomery, maybe the best versatility and highest upside of the 3. I don't know if that's even fair to make that designation, but that's sort of how I feel about it. I think they're going to be okay, but it's also the nature of this roster that Ohio State has built, that one of these position groups have to, or multiple of them have to be in the bottom half of the roster. In our power rankings, doesn't mean that that offensive line, they're at the bottom. It doesn't mean that I don't think they're going to be good. And I also think the tight ends are going to be good. And it pains me to have them last, but there's nowhere else to put them.
There's just like, there's no known commodity there, like at all. It's like can Will Kasmarek make the jump from the MAC? I think the answer is probably yes, but I don't know that he can say definitively. Can G. Scott play tight end 1 snaps? Is Jelani Thurman ready to roll? Like there's all players I like for different reasons, but like them nonetheless. There's just a lot of question marks there. More question marks, I think, than at any other position, in my opinion. So again, I think you're right. It feels odd to put them at the bottom because I do think there's some upside there, but someone has to be last on a really good roster, and that's where I would have the tight ends. I don't know I'm finding it hard to sort of define what exactly Ohio State might need at right guard, and that is also influencing me wanting to put the interior below the tackles, because they're like both subscribers at Rivals and to Subtext, I think, have asked some really good questions, but like stylistic questions about what Chip Kelly wants. Like I think the unquestioned like best people mover of the group is Tegra because he's massive and really strong. Carson Hinsman and Luke Montgomery probably have a little more athleticism. Like, and if Chip wants to pull those guys more and get them in the space, might that benefit them when they're trying to win a starting job? I don't know. That's probably a good question to ask Chip Kelly when we talk to him. I think we talk to him early next week, if I'm not mistaken. So I like kind of want to get that ground covered before trying to figure out who is actually going to play right guard. So while that's an unknown for me, I felt comfortable having tackle one notch above them. But I think combine them, they're all in this kind of in the same position.
Yeah.
In terms of stability. Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to revisiting these rankings after the Oregon game and seeing, because linebacker especially, like that could be a very different conversation.
Sure.
After they get into a game. Wide receiver, same deal. So I think we got to do this again, but we don't have to do it based on pure projection.
Great.
Because tomorrow, when we do the podcast daily for Thursday, it will be hours before camp begins at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, and the offseason will be definitively over. So make sure you set out your milk and cookies tonight for Jerry. Put those just right outside the Biggs lobby. so that he can get those on the way in. There'll be some fans out there. And of course, the Podcast Daily crew will be out there for an open practice. That's tomorrow. This, though, was Wednesday, and there were some power rankings with Bill Landis and me, Austin Ward. We hope you enjoyed them. If not, we'll try again and try and do better tomorrow. See you then.